So there I was, Jake Morrison, cargo hauler extraordinaire, and apparently the galaxy's newest most wanted criminal, standing in the docking bay of what could only be described as space hell, with a really bad interior decorator. Void Station Omega. Even the name sounds like someone was trying way too hard to be intimidating. The place looked like someone had taken a regular space station, painted it black, added some unnecessary spikes, and then let a committee of particularly vindictive architects have their way with it. Red emergency lighting bathed everything in this lovely "you're probably going to die here" ambiance. Real welcoming. Administrator Vexal glided up to me on what I can only assume were his weird slug-like appendages. Picture a 7-foot-tall cross between a bureaucrat and a really upset cucumber, complete with clipboard and the kind of dead-eyed stare you get from someone who's processed way too many intake forms. His voice had that delightful quality of nails on a chalkboard mixed with a dying printer. "Human designation Jake Morrison," he wheezed, consulting his tablet with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "You have been sentenced to indefinite incarceration at this facility, following the diplomatic incident of Kepler 442b. "Look, I already told the tribunal that was an accident," I said, holding up my hands in what I hoped was a peaceful gesture. "How was I supposed to know that glitter's considered a biological weapon by 17 different species?" Vextal's eye stalks rotated in what might have been disgust. The Confederation takes a very dim view of individuals who deploy Class 7 hazardous materials during diplomatic summits, especially individuals from Class 15 Deathworlds. "Class 15 Deathworld?" I laughed, which was apparently the wrong response because 3 guards immediately pointed some very nasty-looking energy weapons at me. "Earth's not that bad. Sure, we've got some spiders and maybe a few volcanoes, but Class 15 seems a bit much." "Your species," Vextal continued, clearly not in the mood for my witty banter, "evolved on a planet where nearly everything is actively trying to kill you. Your atmospheric composition would be toxic to 60% of known civilizations. Your gravity would crush most sentient beings, and you somehow not only survived but thrived in this environment." He gestured with one slimy appendage toward a holographic display that popped up, showing Earth. It was labeled with more warning symbols than a chemical plant's safety manual. "Furthermore," he wheezed on, really getting into his stride now, "your species demonstrates unprecedented levels of adaptability, pack-hunting behavior, persistence predation, and what our xenopsychologists have classified as terrifyingly inappropriate emotional responses to danger. You laugh when threatened. You form social bonds during combat. You have been observed to show increased performance when injured or stressed." "That just sounds like Tuesday to me," I muttered. "Exactly," Vextal said, and I swear his eye stalks narrowed, "which is why you have been assigned to Maximum Security Block 7, alongside our most dangerous offenders. Perhaps sharing accommodation with genuine psychopaths and mass murderers will provide you with a more appropriate peer group." And that's how I found myself being escorted through corridors that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a serious phobia of natural lighting and an unhealthy obsession with making everything as ominous as possible. The guards kept their distance, weapons trained on me like I might suddenly sprout fangs and start breathing fire. "Is this really necessary?" I asked, as we passed what had to be the 15th Danger Deathworld specimen warning sign. "I mean, I'm just a cargo hauler. I deliver things. Sometimes I fix broken hyperdrives. I'm not exactly what you'd call threatening." The lead guard, whose name tag read Captain Zilch in what I assumed was the Galactic Standard font, didn't even look back at me. "Standard protocol for Class 15 entities, prisoner. No exceptions." "Right," I said, because arguing with someone holding a plasma rifle generally isn't my idea of a good time. "Well, this should be fun." If I'd known what was waiting for me in Block 7, I might have asked them to just space me instead. But then again, I've always been an optimist. The cell door slid open with the kind of ominous hiss that movie sound designers dream about, and I got my first look at my new roommates. Now, I'd like to say I handled this with dignity and grace, but honestly, my first thought was that someone had mixed up the prison assignments with a interstellar horror movie casting call. Prex, the Bone Crusher, crouched in the far corner, and let me tell you, whoever named him wasn't being metaphorical. 8 feet of chitinous nightmare fuel, he looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a very angry construction worker. His 4 arms ended in claws that could probably open cans, cars, or probably me without much effort. When he saw me, his compound eyes went wide and he made a sound somewhere between a hiss and a whimper. "Oh great," he clicked in what I assumed was terror. "They're throwing Deathworld monsters in with us now. What did we do to deserve this?" My other cellmate, Gorath the Mind Ripper, was busy pretending to meditate in the opposite corner. Picture an octopus that went to law school, got really stressed, and then decided to take up professional intimidation. His tentacles were covered in what looked like very expensive bioneural interface ports, and he was doing that thing where you try to look like you're not paying attention while obviously listening to everything. I told you. Gorath's voice echoed directly in my head, which was a neat trick and also deeply uncomfortable. The psychic resonance from this creature is overwhelming. The violence radiating from its thoughts is unlike anything I've encountered. Hi guys, I said, setting down the small bag of personal items the guards had let me keep. I'm Jake. Looks like we're going to be sharing this lovely accommodations for a while. Both of them immediately pressed themselves further into their respective corners, which was actually kind of impressive given that Krex was already taking up most of his. The tentacle guy started making these rapid clicking sounds that I assumed was either prayer or some kind of psychic distress call. Listen, I continued, trying to break the ice. I know this is probably awkward for everyone, but I brought some of these protein bars from the transport ship. They're supposed to be chocolate flavored, though I'm pretty sure they lied about that part. Anyone want to share? The silence that followed could have been cut with a knife. Both of my cellmates stared at me like I'd just offered to juggle live grenades while tap dancing. It's trying to poison us, Krex whispered to Gorath in what he probably thought was a quiet voice. No, Gorath's mental voice was practically vibrating with fear. Worse, it's trying to establish dominance through resource distribution. This is classic Deathworld pack behavior. First the food offering, then the territorial claiming, then the systematic elimination of perceived threats. Guys, it's literally just a snack, I said, unwrapping one of the bars. Look, I'll eat it first to prove it's safe. I took a bite, and apparently this was the most terrifying thing either of them had ever witnessed, because Krex actually scrambled up the wall and started clinging to the ceiling like some kind of giant traumatized gecko. Did you see that? He chittered. It consumed potentially toxic material without even testing it first. What kind of survival instincts does this creature have? The kind that evolved on a Class 15 Deathworld, Gorath replied, his tentacles now completely wrapped around himself, in what I was starting to recognize as the universal body language for, please don't murder me. About that time, the guards showed up for their routine check. Captain Zilch peered through the reinforced window with the expression of someone watching a nature documentary about particularly dangerous animals, while his partner, a younger guy whose name tag read Officer Blunk, was actually taking notes on a tablet. How's our new residence settling in? Captain Zilch asked, though he was clearly addressing my cellmates rather than me. It offered us food, Krex reported from his position on the ceiling, and then consumed unknown substances to demonstrate its immunity to toxins. Officer Blunk scribbled frantically on his tablet. Classic intimidation tactics. Should we separate them? No, Captain Zilch said thoughtfully. This is actually valuable behavioral data. We've never had the opportunity to observe Deathworld's social dynamics in a controlled environment. Continue monitoring. And that's when it hit me. These people, these supposedly dangerous criminals and hardened prison guards, were absolutely terrified of me. Not because of anything I'd actually done, but because someone had filled out a form that said Class 15 Deathworld next to my species designation. I was probably in more danger from my roommates having nervous breakdowns than I was from any actual violence, which, knowing my luck, was probably exactly the kind of thing that would get me labeled as even more dangerous. So, I said, settling down on what I assumed was my bunk. Anyone want to talk about their hobbies? I'm really into vintage earth music and small engine repair. The sound that came from both of my cellmates was somewhere between a sob and a prayer. This was going to be a long incarceration. So apparently my daily routine was the stuff of nightmares. Who knew? It started innocently enough. I'm a creature of habit, always have been. Back home, I'd wake up, do some push-ups, maybe jog around the cargo bay while my coffee was brewing, and hum whatever song was stuck in my head. Standard human behavior, right? Wrong. Apparently, this was the most terrifying display of predatory preparation anyone in Void Station Omega had ever witnessed. Day 3 of my incarceration, I was doing my usual 50 push-ups when I noticed Krex had stopped his morning clicking routine and was staring at me with what I can only describe as religious horror. It's conditioning its physical form, he whispered to Gorath, who had somehow managed to wedge himself even further into his corner. Look at the systematic muscle stimulation, the controlled breathing patterns. This is military-grade combat preparation. The rhythm is hypnotic, Gorath's mental voice quavered. It's trying to synchronize our brain patterns to its own. Classic Deathworld mind control technique. Guys, it's just exercise, I panted, moving on to jumping jacks. You know, cardiovascular health, muscle maintenance, basic bodily upkeep? The jumping jacks were apparently too much. Krek scuttled up the wall so fast he left claw marks in the metal, and Gorath started making these high-pitched keening sounds that I was pretty sure weren't supposed to come from tentacled beings. But the real fun started when I began humming. Now, I've got a pretty decent voice, nothing special, but I can carry a tune. That morning, it was some old Earth classic, Don't Worry, Be Happy, because hey, if you can't stay positive in an interstellar maximum security prison, when can you? Apparently, this was a mistake. The entire cell block went dead silent. Not just quiet, but that special kind of silence you get when everyone is holding their breath and praying they won't be noticed. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the walls. The vocalizations have begun, someone whispered from the cell next to ours. It's summoning something. Summoning what? Another voice hissed. I don't know, but my species' ancestral memory is screaming at me to run. By the time I finished the song, there was a crowd of guards pressed against the observation window, all taking frantic notes and occasionally making what looked like religious gestures. Captain Zilch had that look people get when they're watching a nature documentary, and the narrator just said something like, "And now the predator reveals its true nature." "Officer Blanc," he said quietly, never taking his eyes off me. "Add this to the behavioral log. Ritualistic vocalizations, possibly for psychological warfare or territorial marking. Should I classify it as a threat display, sir?" "Unknown at this time. Continue observation." That afternoon in the mess hall, things got even weirder. I was minding my own business, trying to figure out if the gray sludge on my tray was supposed to be food or industrial paste, when my sinuses decided to stage their daily rebellion against the station's recycled air. One little sneeze, that's all it was. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. Half the prisoners hit the deck like they were under mortar fire. The other half froze in place like deer in headlights, except deer don't usually have tentacles or chitinous exoskeletons. One poor guy, who looked like a cross between a ferret and a filing cabinet, actually fainted and had to be carried out by medical. "Biological attack," someone screamed. "The Deathworld creature has released toxins." Alarms started blaring, emergency containment fields activated, guards in full hazmat gear stormed in like they were responding to a chemical weapons incident. And there I was, sitting in the middle of it all with a tissue, trying to explain that I'd just had allergies. "It's just a sneeze," I kept saying to anyone who would listen, which was approximately nobody. "Humans sneeze, it's a normal bodily function, I'm not trying to kill anyone." But the damage was done. By dinner time, word had spread throughout the entire station that the human could weaponize its respiratory system. I overheard 3 different conversations about whether my sneezes could melt through hull plating. The final straw came when I tried to fix the food dispenser in our cell. The thing had been making this grinding noise for days, and it was driving me crazy. Back home, I could fix anything with an engine or a motor, so a simple food dispenser should be no problem, right? Wrong again. I popped off the maintenance panel, took one look at the mess of corroded wiring inside and said, "Well, there's your problem. The primary power coupling is completely shot, and it looks like someone tried to jury-rig a bypass using incompatible components." 10 minutes later, I had the thing humming like new. Fresh food dispensed without that horrible grinding sound. Problem solved. Except apparently, I just demonstrated advanced technological manipulation capabilities and intimate knowledge of station infrastructure. Captain Zilch showed up within the hour, looking like someone had just told him that his biggest nightmare had learned to use tools. "Prisoner Morrison," he said, keeping a safe distance from the cell door, "how did you acquire knowledge of our food distribution systems?" "It's just basic electrical work," I said, wiping grease off my hands. "You've got a standard power coupling system feeding into what looks like a molecular assembler. The wiring was corroded, so I cleaned the connections and rerouted the power flow through the backup conduits." The look on his face was priceless, like I'd just explained how to build a fusion bomb using kitchen utensils. "Officer Blanc," he said slowly, "make a note. The subject displays advanced technical knowledge and mechanical manipulation skills. Recommend upgrading threat assessment." "What should I put for the threat level, sir?" Captain Zilch stared at me for a long moment, watching me wipe my hands on the prison-ish jumpsuit. "I don't know," he said finally. "I honestly don't know." That night, as I lay on my bunk listening to Krex and Gorath whisper their fears about the terrifying Deathworld monster they were trapped with, I couldn't help but laugh. Which, of course, sent both of them into fresh paroxysms of terror. Somewhere in the guard station, I was pretty sure Officer Blanc was dutifully noting that the human displays inappropriate emotional responses. and possible psychological instability. If only they knew that the most dangerous thing about me was my tendency to hume off-key. 2 weeks into my stay at Hotel Nightmare, something weird started happening. Well, weirder than usual. My cellmates stopped trying to hide from me and started talking. Actually talking, not just whimpering and making distress calls. It started with Krex. I was doing my morning routine, which by now had been reclassified by the guards as Advanced Combat Conditioning Protocol Zeta, when I noticed he wasn't clinging to the ceiling in terror. Instead, he was watching me, with what I was learning to recognize as curiosity, rather than abject horror. "Human, Jake," he clicked hesitantly. "May I ask you something?" "Sure, shoot," I said, switching from push-ups to stretches. "What's on your mind?" "Your species evolved on a death world, yes? With constant predation and environmental hazards." "Well, I mean, we've got lions and tigers and hurricanes and stuff, but most of us just go to work and watch TV and complain about taxes. We're not exactly fighting for survival on a daily basis." Rex's compound eyes rotated in what I was starting to recognize as his version of confusion. "But how do you maintain such calm in the face of danger? Even here, surrounded by the galaxy's most violent criminals, you show no fear. Your emotional regulation is extraordinary." And that's when it hit me. This 8-foot killing machine with claws that could open cans and probably my ribcage was asking me for life advice. "Krex," I said gently, "are you okay, buddy? You seem kind of stressed." What followed was the most surreal therapy session of my life, and I once had to counsel a cargo bay full of homesick space truckers through an asteroid field. Turns out, Krex the Bone Crusher, terror of the Vega system, was actually dealing with some pretty serious abandonment issues. His hive had rejected him for being too violent, which was apparently quite an achievement in a species that literally called themselves bone crushers. He'd been trying to prove his worth to various criminal organizations ever since, but deep down, he just wanted to belong somewhere. "I don't understand," he chittered sadly, "why my own kind would cast me out. I followed all the proper protocols for intimidation and territorial defense." "Maybe," I suggested, settling down on my bunk so we could talk at eye level, "they weren't rejecting you for being violent. Maybe they were worried about you? Sometimes when people push others away, it's because they care too much, not too little." Krex stared at me with all 6 eyes. You think my hive mates cared about me?" "I think," I said, "that anyone who names themselves Bone Crusher probably has some complicated feelings about violence, and maybe they saw that you had the potential to be something more than just another scary bug person." I couldn't tell if he was crying or just leaking hydraulic fluid, but something was definitely dripping from his optical sensors. Meanwhile, Gorath had been pretending not to listen, but his tentacles kept inching closer to our conversation. Finally, he gave up the pretense and joined in. "If we're sharing psychological trauma," his mental voice was hesitant, "I should probably mention that I'm vegetarian." "Okay," I said, because honestly, after Krex's breakdown, I was prepared for anything. "Is that a problem in your line of work?" "I'm called the Mind Ripper," he projected miserably. "I'm supposed to be this terrifying psychic torturer, but the truth is, I got into crime because my parents kept pushing me to be more aggressive. They're both successful corporate raiders in the psychic warfare division, and they were so disappointed that their son just wanted to study xenobotany and maybe open a flower shop." "So you became a criminal to impress your parents?" "Seemed like a good idea at the time. But I've never actually ripped anyone's mind. I mostly just give people bad dreams about forgetting to file their taxes or showing up to work naked. The other criminals think I'm holding back my true power for psychological effect. And that's how I found myself running an impromptu support group in a maximum security prison cell. Krex, working through his hive rejection trauma, Gorath dealing with parental pressure and career dissatisfaction, and me trying to figure out how a cargo hauler from Cleveland became an interstellar therapist. The guards noticed the change, too. Captain Zilch and Officer Blunk started showing up for the evening behavioral observation sessions, which basically meant they stood outside our cell and tried to figure out what kind of sophisticated psychological manipulation I was using on my cellmates. "The Deathworld creature has achieved complete behavioral dominance," Captain Zilch noted one evening. "Notice how both subjects now approach it willingly and engage in extended communication." "Is it some kind of mind control, sir?" Officer Blunk asked, scribbling notes. "Unknown, but the technique is remarkably effective. Perhaps we should study its methods." That's when things got really weird. Captain Zilch started asking me questions. Not official interrogation stuff, just casual conversation about human psychology and conflict resolution. Turns out, running a maximum security prison was stressing him out pretty badly. "The thing is," he confided one evening, "I never wanted to be a guard. I wanted to be a teacher, maybe work with younglings in the education sector, but my family has a long military tradition and they expected me to serve in some capacity." "So you're basically doing a job you hate to meet other people's expectations?" I asked. "When you put it that way, it sounds rather foolish." "Not foolish," I said. "Just human. I mean, not literally human, but you know what I mean. We all do things that don't make us happy because we think we're supposed to." Officer Blunk, who had been listening from around the corner, finally worked up the courage to join the conversation. Poor kid was younger than most of my cargo containers, and about twice as nervous. "I just wanted to make friends," he blurted out. "Everyone at the academy said prison work was good for building character and making professional connections, but everyone here is either a dangerous criminal or too scared of the dangerous criminals to talk to anyone." "Have you tried just being yourself?" I suggested. "Sometimes the best way to make friends is to stop trying so hard and just be genuine." And somehow, someway, I was giving life advice to the people who were supposed to be guarding me, in a maximum security prison, in space, while being classified as a dangerous Deathworld predator. My life had officially become weirder than anything I could have made up. But the strangest part? It was actually working. Krex was standing up straighter, taking pride in his analytical abilities rather than just his intimidation factor. Gorath had started a small hydroponic garden in the corner of our cell, growing something that looked suspiciously like space daisies. Captain Zilch was reading educational theory texts during his off hours, and Officer Blunk had started an informal book club with some of the lower security prisoners. 3 weeks in, and I'd accidentally turned the most feared cell block in the galaxy into some kind of cosmic group therapy session. I should probably have seen the trouble coming. The trouble had a name, and that name was Tharks the Annihilator. And unlike everyone else in this cosmic house of mirrors, Tharks actually lived up to his reputation. He arrived on a Tuesday, which seemed like a particularly mundane day for the galaxy's most wanted war criminal to show up. I was in the middle of helping Gorath repot his space daisies when the entire station went into lockdown. Red lights, blaring alarms, the whole 9 yards of, "Oh crap, something very bad is happening." "New arrival in maximum security," Captain Zilch's voice crackled over the intercom, and for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded genuinely terrified. "All personnel maintain maximum distance. All prisoners remain in cells until further notice." Through our cell's tiny window, I watched as what could only be described as a walking nightmare made its way down the corridor. Tharks looked like someone had taken a rhinoceros, crossed it with a bulldozer, given it opposable thumbs, and then let it lift weights for about 50 years. His hide was covered in scars that looked suspiciously like they came from various military-grade weapons, and his eyes had that flat, dead look that you see in people who've done terrible things and slept just fine afterward. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. When he looked at me through the window, he didn't flinch. Didn't scramble for cover, didn't make terrified clicking noises, didn't project psychic distress calls. He just smiled. And it was the kind of smile that suggested he knew something everyone else didn't. Well, his voice was like gravel being processed through a wood chipper. "The famous Deathworld monster, I've been looking forward to meeting you." Over the next few days, Tharks made it very clear that he was not impressed by humanity's reputation. While every other prisoner gave me a wide berth, he went out of his way to get close. During exercise periods, he'd position himself right next to me. In the mess hall, he'd sit across from me and stare with those dead eyes while methodically crushing his food containers with his bare hands. "You know what I think?" he said on the 3rd day, loud enough for half the mess hall to hear. "I think this whole Deathworld monster thing is complete garbage. I think you're just another soft little creature that got lucky with some good marketing." The entire cafeteria went dead silent. Even the guards stopped their patrol routes to watch what was happening. Krex, who had been sitting next to me, slowly scooted his tray away like he was trying to avoid blast radius. "I think," I said carefully, "you're entitled to your opinion." Tharks laughed, and it sounded like a cement mixer having a seizure. "See? Weak. A real predator would have responded to that challenge. But you're just some cargo hauler who got mixed up in paperwork." He wasn't wrong, which was the really terrifying part. Everyone else's fear had been based on ignorance and bureaucratic classification errors. But Tharks had done his homework. He knew exactly what I was, and what I wasn't. "Tell you what," he continued, standing up to his full 8-foot height. "Let's test this Deathworld theory. Tonight, when the lights go out, we'll see how dangerous you really are." That evening, as the station settled into its night cycle, I lay on my bunk trying to figure out how I'd managed to get myself into this situation. Krex was nervous clicking in the corner, and Goreth's tentacles were doing that thing where they writhe around when he's having anxiety attacks. "Human Jake," Krex whispered, "perhaps you should demonstrate your true capabilities to Tharks. Show him why our species fear Deathworld predators." "Yeah, about that," I said. "I'm starting to think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding about the whole Deathworld thing." "What do you mean?" Gorath's mental voice was tight with worry. "I mean, I'm pretty sure Tharks is right. I'm not actually dangerous. I'm just a guy who delivers stuff and occasionally fixes broken machinery. The only reason everyone's been afraid of me is because some bureaucrat checked the wrong box on a form." The silence that followed was profound and deeply uncomfortable. "But," Krex said slowly, "the psychological warfare, the technological manipulation, the territorial dominance displays. Exercise, basic electrical work, and trying to be friendly," I corrected. "Which means when Tharks decides to test whether I'm actually dangerous, he's going to discover that I'm about as threatening as a particularly mild sandwich." That's when the lights went out and all hell broke loose. The emergency lighting kicked in just as the first explosion echoed through the station. Not the controlled kind of explosion you get from maintenance work, but the chaotic, destructive kind that suggests someone has decided that the current arrangement of matter in the universe is unsatisfactory. "Prisoner revolt in sectors 7 through 12, the intercom crackled. "All guards to emergency stations, this is not a drill." Through the chaos of alarms and shouting, I could hear Thark's voice booming through the corridors. "Attention, pathetic weaklings, your new management has arrived." It turned out that Tharks hadn't just been planning to test my Deathworld credentials. He'd been planning a complete takeover of the station, and my supposed reputation had been the only thing standing in his way. With that obstacle removed, he'd activated sleeper agents throughout the prison and launched a full-scale revolt. "We need to get out of here," I said, as the sound of energy weapons fire got closer to our block. "The cell doors are magnetically sealed," Gorath projected. "Without guard authorization, we're trapped." That's when I heard something that made my heart stop. The sound of Captain Zilch screaming. Through our tiny window, I could see into the guard station. Tharks had cornered both Zilch and Officer Blunk, and he was holding some kind of nasty-looking weapon that I really didn't want to see in action. "Your Deathworld pet was a disappointment," Tharks was saying, pressing the weapon against Zilch's head. "But you two might be useful as hostages, or entertainment. I haven't decided yet." Officer Blunk, brave kid that he was, stepped in front of his captain. "Leave him alone. If you want to hurt someone, hurt me instead." "How touching," Tharks rumbled. "I think I'll hurt both of you just to be thorough." And that's when something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the fact that these people had become my friends, despite the completely insane circumstances. Maybe it was seeing a kid like Blunk try to protect someone he cared about. Or maybe it was just that I was really, really tired of being scared and confused, and treated like something I wasn't. "Krex," I said, "remember how you said I showed no fear in the face of danger?" "Yes?" "Well, I lied. I've been terrified since the moment I got here. But you know what's more terrifying than being scared? Watching bad things happen to people you care about and not doing anything about it." I walked over to the cell door's control panel, the one I'd been carefully not thinking about for the past month because tampering with security systems was probably not a great idea for someone trying to avoid additional charges. "Gorath, I'm going to need you to do that mind-reading thing on the guard station. I need to know exactly where Tharks is positioned." "Human Jake, what are you planning?" "Something incredibly stupid that will probably get us all killed," I said, popping off the control panel's cover plate. "But sometimes incredibly stupid is all you've got." The wiring inside was more complex than the food dispenser, but the basic principles were the same. Power flows from point A to point B, and if you redirect it properly, you can make things happen. In this case, I wanted to make the magnetic locks stop happening. "Jake," Krex clicked nervously, "are you certain about this? Once we leave the cell, we'll be in direct violation of containment protocols." "Krex," I said, carefully rerouting power through the backup systems, "I think we passed violation of protocols about the time a genocidal maniac decided to redecorate the station with explosive devices." The lock disengaged with a soft click. "Besides," I added, stepping into the corridor for the first time in a month, "somebody needs to go save our friends, and apparently the galaxy's most feared Deathworld predator is the only one available for the job." That's when I realized that maybe, just maybe, the bureaucrats had gotten something right after all. Not about me being some kind of super predator, but about humans in general. Because when push came to shove, when people I cared about were in danger, I discovered that I was absolutely willing to do whatever it took to protect them, even if it meant finally living up to that dangerous classification. What happened next probably won't go down in military history as humanity's finest tactical moment, but it definitely proved that sometimes the best weapon is just refusing to give up on people. I burst into the guard station with all the strategic finesse of a caffeinated rhinoceros, which is to say, none whatsoever. Thark spun around, weapon still trained on Captain Zilch, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Him, 8 feet of scarred military-grade nightmare fuel. Me, 5'10" of mildly out-of-shape cargo hauler in a prison jumpsuit. Well, well, Tharks rumbled, the fake Deathworld monster finally shows some spine. Come to die heroically for your little friends. Actually, I said, I came to talk. The look on his face was priceless, like I'd just suggested we settle our differences with interpretive dance. Talk? His laugh was like rocks in a blender. You pathetic little creature. I am Tharks the Annihilator. I have reduced entire star systems to cosmic dust. I have made civilizations weep at the mere mention of my name. And you want to talk? Yeah, I said, taking a step closer despite every survival instinct screaming at me to run. Because you know what I think? I think someone who calls himself the Annihilator and goes around destroying things isn't actually trying to hurt people. He's trying to hurt himself. For the first time since I'd met him, Tharks looked genuinely confused. What are you babbling about? You're angry, I continued, edging slowly toward where Officer Blunk was crouched behind an overturned desk. Really, really angry. And you've been carrying that anger around for so long that you've forgotten what you're actually angry about. So you just destroy things, hoping that eventually you'll destroy the right thing, and the pain will stop. You don't know anything about me, Tharks snarled, but his weapon wavered slightly. I know you've been alone for a long time, I said. I know that whatever happened to make you this angry, you've never had anyone to talk to about it. And I know that deep down, you're just as scared and confused as everyone else in this cosmic madhouse. That's when Tharks made his mistake. He laughed again, lowering his weapon just enough to gesture dismissively at me. You think you can psychoanalyze me into submission, little human? I've killed thousands. I've watched planets burn. I know, I said, and I meant it. And I bet you remember every single one. I bet they haunt you. I bet you started destroying things because someone destroyed something precious to you first, and now you can't figure out how to stop. The weapon came back up, but his hands were shaking now. Shut up. What was it? I asked gently, the same tone I'd used with Krex and Goroth during their breakdowns. What did they take from you? I said, shut up! The energy blast went wide, scorching the wall next to my head, close enough that I could smell ozone and burned metal. Was it your family, your home, someone you loved? They took everything! The roar that came out of Tharks was raw pain-given voice, the sound of something breaking that had been held together by rage and willpower for too long. They said we were too dangerous to exist. My people, my culture, my children, gone. Sterilized from orbit because some Confederation committee decided we were a threat to galactic stability? And there it was. The truth behind all that anger and destruction. So you became what they said you were, I said softly. You became the monster they accused you of being, because if you were going to lose everything anyway, at least you could make them pay for it. Thark's weapon clattered to the floor. 8 feet of living nightmare crumpled like a broken toy, and for the first time, I saw him for what he really was. Someone who had lost everything, and didn't know how to live with that loss. 47 years, he whispered, his voice barely audible. 47 years of making them afraid, making them hurt, making them pay. And it never brings them back. It never makes the pain stop. I walked over and sat down on the floor next to him, ignoring the fact that he could probably snap my neck with one hand. No, I agreed. It doesn't. But you know what might help? What? He looked up at me with eyes that weren't dead anymore, just tired. So very, very tired. Having people who understand. Having a place where you don't have to be the monster anymore. Having friends. That's when Krex and Goroth came charging into the guard station, ready to defend their human friend against impossible odds. They stopped short when they saw Thark sitting on the floor, looking more like a broken grandfather than a galactic terror. Is he crying? Goroth's mental voice was filled with confusion. Yes, I said, and that's okay. Sometimes crying is what you need to do. Captain Zilch, who had been watching this entire exchange with the expression of someone whose understanding of the universe had just been completely rearranged, slowly approached us. Tharks, he said carefully. The revolt. Your people throughout the station. Called off, Tharks mumbled, pulling out some kind of communicator. Stand down, all units, the operation is terminated. Just like that? Officer Blunk asked, finally emerging from behind the desk. Just like that, Tharks confirmed. Turns out when you actually have someone to talk to, violence becomes a lot less appealing. And that's how the most feared prison revolt in Confederation history ended, not with energy weapons and explosions, but with a group therapy session in a guard station. 6 months later, Void Station Omega had been completely transformed. The Galactic Council, initially baffled by the sudden drop in violence and disciplinary incidents, had sent investigative teams to figure out what was going on. What they found was a maximum security prison that had somehow turned into the most effective rehabilitation center in known space. Tharks had become the unofficial leader of a prisoner support group that met every Tuesday in what used to be the solitary confinement block. Krex was taking correspondence courses in xenopsychology and had started a mentorship program for newly arrived inmates. Gorath's hydroponic gardens now supplied fresh vegetables to the entire station, and he'd been granted permission to establish a small botanical laboratory. Captain Zilch had been promoted to Director of Rehabilitation Services and was developing training programs based on what he'd learned watching me interact with the prisoners. Officer Blunk, now Lieutenant Blunk, ran a successful conflict resolution program and had become the most popular staff member on the station. As for me, well, I never did get that cargo hauling license back. Instead, I received an official commendation from the Galactic Confederation for innovative approaches to interspecies conflict resolution, and a job offer as Director of Human-Alien Relations for the Prison Reform Initiative. Turns out the bureaucrats were right about humans being dangerous, just not in the way they thought. We're not dangerous because we're physically superior or technologically advanced. We're dangerous because we have this weird habit of seeing people as people, even when they're trying really hard to be monsters. We're dangerous because we refuse to give up on each other, even when giving up would be the sensible thing to do. And apparently that's exactly the kind of dangerous the galaxy needed. The official report listed my original crime as accidental deployment of hazardous materials during diplomatic proceedings, but everyone who was there knows the truth. I wasn't imprisoned for smuggling glitter to a peace summit. I was imprisoned for the most dangerous human trait of all, the stubborn belief that everyone deserves a second chance, even when they've spent 47 years proving they don't. Especially then. The real monsters, it turns out, were the friends we made along the way, and honestly, I couldn't be happier about it.